we are going to review some stuff from period 3 for AP World History. We're talking about 600 CE to 1450 CE. This is going to kind of be that Middle Ages period. For many reasons, we're going to see it's going to be after the classical empires, and so many call this the post-classical area. Many others call it, like we said, the Middle Ages, but that doesn't really give a lot of credit to a lot of the different things that are actually occurring outside of Europe. Others just call it the third wave civilization era. So lots of things going on, and so we want to cover them and make sure you know all about them. One of the major things that's going to occur during this period is going to the development of Islam. We know in period 1 and 2 we have the emergence of some of the major world religions, but we know that Islam, especially today, is going to be one that's really important for us to understand, and that's going to develop in this period. We know that ultimately between 622 and Muhammad's death in 632, that this is really going to really increase throughout the Arabian Peninsula, and then after his death even expand even more. So as we said, the Prophet Muhammad is going to be the prophet, the guy that starts all of this, and he's going to have some revelations back in 610 CE. Ultimately, we're going to see the beliefs of Islam outlined in the 5 pillars. And so we see the profession of faith, that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Ultimately, we know that Allah is a monotheistic God. They focus only on one. Allah just means God in Arabic. But that is going to be the first pillar of Islam. As we continue, we know that they also have prayer 5 times a day towards Mecca. We have almsgiving in support of the poor. Ramadan is the month of fasting, and Hajj is the pilgrimage all the way to Mecca if you are physically able. Ultimately, after the death of Muhammad, there became some disagreements about who should continue to lead the Ummah, or the community of believers. Those who will later become Sunni Muslims will believe that the leader of the Ummah should be based on their character, whereas those who are Shia are going to believe that this person should be from the line of Muhammad. And so we're going to have this huge disagreement, which is going to ultimately have this split between these 2 major sects of Islam. Now we know that this is a universal religion. Other people can convert to Islam, and they are open to all. And it is ultimately going to spread because of the expanding Islamic control over different parts of land during the Umayyad and the Abbasid empires. Also, there's going to be missionaries, and then ultimately, as Muhammad was himself merchant, we're going to see that it's going to spread around these different trade routes, especially in the Indian Ocean trade network, and then even into the Trans-Sahara trade network. Now we're going to also note there's going to be some significant differences in the architecture within the Islamic world. Some of the things that you'll notice right away is we're looking at the minarets, and then we also see a lot of domed architecture, which you're going to see as well. We're also going to see, and this is kind of interesting as you look at this top right picture, we're going to see the focus of geometric shapes as you are looking at their architecture. They do not believe in having kind of an icon or like a visual representative of Muhammad, so they don't want to see like his face or those kind of things. So everything is very geometric shaped. And so as you're kind of looking at these different things, you'll be able to identify, oh, this is definitely Islamic focused. Now we're looking at trade networks. You should know a whole bunch of this, but the big thing about during period 3 is the expansion, the increase of trade, of communication, of exchange networks. And so we know that there's going to be 3 major routes that we've talked about before. We're going to have the Silk Road network as we're looking at the trade routes that are going to kind of connect Asia and then ultimately to the Mediterranean. We're going to have Indian Ocean trade that we're going to be kind of driven again by the monsoons, but ultimately within this whole region. And then we're also going to have Trans-Sahara trade across the Saharan desert. So these 3 networks we should be really familiar with, especially after our project. This was able to be really occur because of the new technologies that happened. So such as the compass, as you see here, really important to be able to know where you're going. The astrolabe is going to help as people are sailing across different oceans to be able to know as you look at the horizon and kind of pinpoint a star and be able to go towards that within the dark. We're going to see camel caravans. That will be important as we're looking at trans-Sahara trades, but also the Silk Road networks. And then also we're going to see the emergence of new larger ships that will allow you to have a larger capacity. And they're also using the lateen sails in many ways, which will allow them not have to necessarily rely on the monsoon winds. We also are going to see the emergence of credit, paper money occur during this time. We're also going to see the spread of luxury goods and the trade of these different things. You should know this pretty well too, but we know that out of kind of the area of China, we're going to see silk and porcelain emerge from this area. We're going to see spices through a lot of different areas. I'll just kind of put it all throughout the East Indies and India itself. We know pepper and cotton are going to be major as we're looking at India. And so some of those trade goods. We also know precious metals and gems and slaves, exotic animals as we're looking at Africa. And then olive oil is going to be a Mediterranean good as you're looking at all these different trade goods that are being spread. And we also know, obviously, it's more than just goods, but religion as well. And so we see that within Europe, we're going to see Christianity spread within this area. We also are going to see Buddhism spread, which we know began in India, but it's also going to spread along the Silk Roads into China, and it's also going to spread into Southeast Asia. Hinduism as well, which we know starts in India as well, is also going to move into Southeast Asia, but this is going to be not because more people are converting, but people are just moving into that region compared to just staying in India. And then also Islam we know is going to begin in the Arabian Peninsula, and then also is going to move kind of throughout as we see Northern Africa and across the trans-Saharan routes. We're going to see movement somewhat into kind of Central Asia, but then ultimately along the Swahili coast and throughout the Indian Ocean network, not necessarily to Australia. Also, just kind of a key thing to know is when we're looking at Islam and the spread of it, many people believe that most people who are Muslim live kind of within this area, which is actually not correct at all. People, if you're looking for the largest kind of populations of people who are Muslim followers, or, followers of Islam and who are Muslims, we're going to see it actually in Southeast and South Asia. Specifically, looking at Indonesia is kind of the largest area. So just be aware of that. That's one key thing you'll need to know. Also, we're going to look at how as Islam spreads across the Swahili coast, we're going to see this emergence of Swahili as a language. And so this Swahili language is actually a combination of Bantu, which we just talked about before, and Arabic. And those together form Swahili as a language. We also see, again, as we're looking at diffusion of ideas and religions and goods, we're going to see crops move. And so we're going to see fast ripening rice in southern China. We're going to see Southeast Asia, and we're going to see that move into Vietnam as well, so Southeast Asia. We're also going to have bananas within Africa. We're also going to see this emergence of cotton spreading kind of throughout the Islamic empires. So we're going to see that spread this way, but we're also going to see it into the Mediterranean. And sugar is going to be something we're going to talk a lot more in period 4 as people are looking, and this kind of becomes a hot commodity, and looking for areas to grow sugarcane. Again, so goods and religion and crops, but we also have disease that moves along these trade routes. And so we know the Black Death kind of moved along from the trade routes of the Silk Road and also into the Mediterranean trade routes by sea because of the Mongols, but ultimately it's going to have major 4 easy kind of huge impacts that are pretty major. One, we're going to see huge population loss. I wrote approximately 50% because it really depends. Some areas it's like as low as 30, some is as high as 60 to 70%, and so a nice middle ground, but ultimately huge population loss. It's going to assist in ending the feudal system as it's going to allow for the freedom of serfs and needing paid labor as the population loss, so this is going to kind of be connected here. Many people are going to blame Jews, and so again they're going to be kind of looked at as the people who are at fault, even though there is no reason to believe such things. And this last one is kind of interesting as we're looking at it. We're going to see a decrease in the Roman Catholic Church, or at least their influence. And some of this is going to be because the Catholic Church, and when people are dying from the plague, they wanted to have last rites, part of their beliefs as a Catholic. They wanted to go see a priest, and so many priests got sick and died, which led to less people being able to, be leading the church. We also are going to see that ultimately some people are just going to be more pessimistic after so much death and lose some of their faith in the process. But it's really not going to die out completely, as we see that the Renaissance is going to be very influenced by the Roman Catholic Church still. Now, as we're looking at the different governments, we're going to see this continuity, this continuation of these great states. And so there's a lot during period 3 of different areas, and so we just want to draw our attention to some of them. So as we're looking here, we know the Byzantine Empire is going to be a major one within this area with Constantinople, its huge walls, etc. We know that Europe overall is going to be a part of the Middle Ages. It's going to be a feudal period that's going to be slightly different. Also, as we kind of carry around, we're going to see that Islam is going to emerge, and so I'll just kind of shade that for now. We're going to see that Islam is going to emerge in the Arabian Peninsula, move into what was the Persian Empire, with the Umayyads across northern Africa, and then even into northern Europe. And so we're going to see these Islamic empires kind of in this era, so the Umayyads and the Abbasids. In East Asia, as we're looking at China again, we're going to have the Sui dynasty, the Tang dynasty, and the Song dynasty that are going to emerge. And ultimately, I guess we can even say right away, the Yuan dynasty, which is going to be the Mongols. In Africa, we're going to also see in Western Africa the empires of Ghana and Mali and Songhai all develop, as well as we're going to see kind of the Swahili coast city-states in this region. So a lot going on in different empires during this time. We can even add up into, this is a little too far north, but the Kievan Rus, which is going to be influenced again by the Byzantine Empire. So a lot of key empires that are emerging during this time as we kind of continue on. To be able to maintain their empires, we have a lot of influence on different ways to kind of rule their empires. And so as we're looking at this, we see the Byzantine Empire. So as we're looking at the Byzantines, they use the theme system, a way of kind of separating the land of their empire and then having different kind of military governors over those different periods, a way to kind of maintain control. We talked a lot about Caesaropapism, this idea that the Caesar, with their Roman influence, right, is over the Pope. In this instance, that the emperor is over the patriarch, or the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church in the Byzantine Empire. We also know, as they considered themselves Romans, they had a Roman law code that Justinian began a while at the beginning of the Byzantine Empire. And so that's huge as we're looking at how they maintain state control. The Kievan Rus then is going to be in Kiev, modern-day Kiev, as we're looking at early Russia, and we're going to see that a lot of the Byzantine culture, such as Caesaropapism and the Eastern Orthodox faith, is going to spread because of some different missionaries who developed Cyrillic. And so we're going to see kind of this emergence and this beginning, and you'll see a lot of similarities between the Byzantine Empire and the Kievan Rus in architecture, in beliefs, and just kind of how they're running their government. Another, as we're looking at politics, we look at the Umayyad Empire, is going to expand through conquest as we're looking from the Middle East into Spain, into northern Africa, all throughout the Middle East and what used to be Persia. There's going to be a focus that if you are an Arab Muslim, you kind of have more rights and more clout, and then they kind of discriminated against non-Arab Muslims. They also instated the jizya, which is going to be that tax on folks who are non-Muslims as well. So we're seeing the different ways for them to kind of maintain control. This is your largest Islamic empire. The Abbasid is going to be slightly smaller than this. They're going to lose control of some of those large areas. And they're going to move their capital away from Damascus to Baghdad, into modern-day Iraq. And this is going to be a golden age period of time within the Abbasid Empire. They're going to focus a lot on the ulama, or those scholars, and ultimately the unity of the ulama, or the ummah. They're not going to care as much whether or not you are an Arab Muslim or anyone throughout the empire. So this is not going to be a focus here. It's whoever is part of the ummah is kind of in. And so we're going to see a lot of new things throughout this golden age in math and science that is going to develop. In East Asia, we're going to see three major empires develop, the Sui, Tang, and Song empires. We're going to see that the Sui is very similar to what we learned before about the Qin. It's going to be short and legalistic. They're also going to be responsible for building the Grand Canal, which is going to be able to connect northern and southern China, as all their rivers kind of flow east-west. The Tang dynasty is then going to follow the Sui, and they're going to be a longer dynasty. They're going to focus on Confucianism, very similar to the Han dynasty, and they're going to increase the use of the civil service exam. The Song dynasty is going to do the same thing. They're going to also increase it even more, the use of kind of finding these bureaucrats to work. So much so, but because of a rebellion that happened during the Tang dynasty, they're going to put bureaucrats in charge of the military, which is going to lead to having a weaker military. This is also the time for elite women when foot binding is going to become popular. Other two regions that we kind of want to just kind of see how they're running, we see Mali within Africa. We're going to see Mansa Musa take the Hajj and ultimately use Islam as a unifying force, really bringing back Islamic learning to the city of Timbuktu within Mali. So that's really important. And then ultimately the Mongols. And the Mongols are going to conquer and impact, three major regions. And so we're going to see in China, they're going to actually have the Yuan dynasty, and they're going to rule China there. And while there's going to be some conflict, it's going to be way more peaceful than we're going to see under the Abbasid. Under the Abbasid, they conquer and take over that area in the Persian Empire. And then Russia is going to be a little bit different. They are going to exact tribute from them, and they're not going to settle there, but they're going to conquer those areas and ultimately rule them in very different ways. When we look at both Europe and Japan, we're seeing that they are going to have, during this time, feudal systems. And we've talked about this, where the real kind of kings and emperor aren't as much in control as it seems to be, but really people are in these self-sufficient communities, where kind of people are going to, that have land, they're going to offer the land out to other people, in exchange for kind of this commitment towards each other. So nobles are going to give land ultimately to warriors who are going to protect the land, and then ultimately, which we know as knights, and then we're going to have peasants that are going to work the land. And so as you're looking at this, this area here, you're going to see how this works. And it's very similar, and we talked about this between the differences and the similarities between European and Japanese feudalism. We're going to see that they're going to have these in Japan. While they have an emperor, the real control in Japan is going to be the shogun, that military leader that kind of oversees the system. We know that in both, when we're looking at the knights and the samurai, they both have a code of conduct. And so we have chivalry for those that are knights and bushido for the samurai within Japan. And so the system, not very connected to other civilizations during this time, very self-sufficient, and so that's kind of how it worked. We know in Europe, though, that they're going to be more influenced by Christianity, and we're going to see some themes of this, whereas in Japan, there's going to be more of a Buddhism and Shinto and Confucian focus here. And so we're going to see nature themes. So some differences we have, but the similarities in the feudal systems. Ultimately, there's going to be a lot of conflict that's going to occur. We're going to see the Great Schism of 1054, where we're going to see the split between the Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox Church. Before it was just one church. And so we're going to have two divisions here based on their different beliefs. We're going to see that as the Turks move into Anatolia, from the steppes convert to Islam, that there's going to be conflict between the Turks and those European Christians throughout the Crusades. Also, we're going to see the Mongols, when they come and conquer the Abbasid and Russia and the Song. Not exactly always happy. This ultimately led to the Yuan dynasty. But once again, some conflict there. And then also kind of more internally, the An Lushan rebellion within the Tang dynasty is where someone's going to kind of move up their ranks. They're not going to be ethnically Chinese, but they had opportunities under the Tang dynasty, moved the ranks, and then kind of had a rebellion to take over. It never ended. The Tang, but it did decrease their power. Okay, and we see later with the Song that they didn't want really strong military leaders because that could happen again, which also led to their fall to the Mongols later on. And ultimately, kind of as we're looking at the end of period 3, we're going to see that there's going to be an increase in economic productivity. There's going to be new inventions in Europe, kind of as things are on the up and up in Europe. The High Middle Ages, they're going to have new inventions like the horse collar and the heavy plow and the 3-field system, which increases agricultural production. So we have food surpluses. And when you have that, then we can have, again, people working other jobs than just farming the land. And so we start ending the feudal system. And out of that will come guilds and kind of organized labor. We're going to see people working on kind of manufacturing these goods in ways where there's kind of like, standards to fit by. We see universities today that emerged during this time. We're also going to see, as we talked about, the Renaissance beginning kind of in Venice, and in Italy. It's going to begin in the Southern Renaissance in Italy. We're going to see new inventions, oil paints and arts. We're going to see this revival of Greek and Roman architecture. And so as we start kind of moving out of this, you see this revival happening within Europe. And then, again, in Southeast Asia, and even East Asia, we're going to see fast ripening rice is going to increase, again, their surplus and allow for more growth. And so as we kind of move into period 4, as we move into the age of exploration, we're seeing that the world is producing more and more food, which is allowing for new things. And so we're on kind of the cusp of lots of changes, but those are the major things you need to know about period 3.